Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joan Farini-Mundy, the president of the University of Maine and our regional campus, the University of Maine at Machias. Welcome to our session today, our town hall being offered virtually to all of you. We've invited the University of Maine and University of Maine Machias communities to include faculty, staff, students, alums, friends of our universities, and so we're delighted to be able to be with you. There's a lot to talk about. We have several folks here who are going to be a part of our conversation. I'm especially pleased to be able to introduce Chancellor Dan Malloy, who is the Chancellor of the University of Maine system, and he'll have some remarks for us in a moment. He'll be a part of our Q&A as well as others that I'll introduce quickly in a second. I'm just going to say a few opening things, and then you've already submitted so many wonderful questions that we'll go right to those. But what those questions are going to do really is give us the chance to talk about three very important areas of work for us that are all happening simultaneously. First, we're closing out the spring 2020 semester. And I just need to thank everyone involved in making that as successful as it could be under very challenging and difficult circumstances. Our students were able to prevail and persist. We had about a 98, 99% for graduate students persistence rate in the courses that were offered this semester at the University of Maine. We had faculty who on very short notice, were able to move their instruction to online and to remote versions and to handle that very nimbly and flexibly and with high quality. We have had staff and administrators across the universities who have done double duty, triple duty to make sure that we can continue to provide excellent service in many areas, even when our students were not here on campus with us. We're also, of course, working on summer. It is summer now, technically. I guess the semester ended. We had graduation happen in terms of virtual offerings and more to come on that, of course. But summer is here. Our summer sessions are in place. Lots of online opportunities across the system and certainly at the University of Maine. And some new plans, especially aimed at our new students, at our class of 2024 that we'll be welcoming in the fall. And so we'll hear more later from our provost about what we're putting together to help you all feel ready to come in, ready to move into your courses in the fall. We're also, of course, planning for the fall, the third piece of our activity at this time, all three happening all together. And your questions are great because as I go through your questions and look at what you're asking, essentially you could be the planning committees, right? You're raising the issues that we are grappling with, and you've offered some new ones that we're thinking about too. So everything from the very particular challenges of when decisions are made and how we announce them and make them known to everyone, those are on everyone's mind, I know, but also what will classrooms look like? We're all hoping to be here face to face, following guidelines for safety, of course, following state and other kinds of guidelines. So what does that look like? What does distancing look like in a classroom? How do lab classes work? We're working on all of that, and we'll say more as we go. But with that, I would again like to welcome and thank our Chancellor. He'll make a few remarks and we'll introduce the rest and go right to questions. So Chancellor, you're on mute.
Thank you very much for the introduction and inviting me to participate, and happy to participate. I want to be as available to faculty, staff, and students as I possibly can. One of the outcomes of going to online learning is my tour that would have brought me to all the campuses 3 more times this past semester got canceled really at the beginning, and wasn't able to make as many trips to see faculty members as I would have liked. And we'll pick that up in the fall when we return, hopefully, if we can return to in-classroom learning. I also want to thank faculty, staff, and students for really the exemplary work they did to finish the semester. The idea that we were able to produce celebrations for 4,500 graduates was really quite amazing. That we were able to stand up over 200,000 hours of coursework online and do that in about a 10-day period of time was amazing. The the support of students. For some of us, like myself, who are a little constrained with respect to our abilities, was really quite good to hear about. And the team effort between students, faculty, and staff was just amazing. So thank you for doing what you did, which was to respond to really one of the greatest crises in our lifetime, one of the greatest crises experienced during the last 100 years, not perhaps on the stage of or on the scale of World War II or the First World War, but certainly really quite amazing. And as we mourn the passing of over 92,000 American citizens, perhaps many more when the final count is had, and understand that the University of Maine system played a role in making sure that people in Maine were ultimately safer than they would have been if we had sent a bunch of people home for spring break and they had all returned to the state. I think one of the really shining moments is how few cases Maine has experienced, and quite frankly, how in doing what we did, and along with the private universities, we played a role in holding that number down. Obviously, a lot of attention being given to the coming semester, and I know we'll get to some questions on that. Certainly ready to not only answer questions, but hear suggestions if there are such. And I think I'll stop there in anticipation of the question and answer discussion, unless, Joan, you want me to go right, but I think you wanted to get everybody involved.
Yeah,
so
thanks, Chancellor.
I'll be quiet.
That's okay. You're going to be back on shortly, I'm sure. I'd like each person to just introduce themselves briefly. Robert?
Hi, folks. It's good to see you virtually. I'm Robert Dana. I'm the Vice President for Student Life and Inclusive Excellence in Orono and at Machias. So lovely to be with you.
Abby?
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby. I'm the undergraduate representative to the Board of Trustees.
And Abby, just tell us your major and your year and your last name.
Sure. So Abby Daypray. I'm a rising senior in political science with some minors in French International Affairs and Legal Studies.
Thank you. Faye?
Faye Gilbert. I am the Interim Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs Provost, and I am also Dean of the Maine Business School.
And Dan?
I'm Daniel Qualls. I'm the head of campus at the University of Maine at Machias, and I'm a Vice President of Academic Affairs.
Great, thank you all. And I think we'll go right to the questions. And so what I'll be doing is reading them and trying to group them as best I can, and then calling on someone. And so I think we will go back to Chancellor Malloy to start, because there really are several questions that reflect concerns and uncertainties. What are we looking at for fall? What's our thinking right now? What's your thinking? How are you connecting that to the state's guidance and to the state's plans and to higher ed across Maine?
Do we have a semester so I can answer that question? There's so much involved in it. I mean, honestly, it is overwhelming, the amount of planning that has to go into opening a semester under the conditions that we'll need to open a semester in. Obviously, part of that decision-making process is whether it will be, as we've had it, as we finish the last semester, totally online, or whether there will be some other form. I have taken to describing what I would call a hybrid, where we would have in-class room teaching or learning for some students. Some students would be following the progress of the class online, and still further, some other students might be able to call up the class if they missed it or couldn't attend it at the time it was offered. Toward that end, we're spending about $2.56 million to upgrade somewhere between 162 and 181 classrooms with more current technology to make the learning experience easier to deliver for faculty and better received by students in the event that we might have in-classroom learning. And even if we don't, I suspect we'll be operating under very different rules than the ones that we had to impose in March, and having facilities available for the use of teaching, particularly with a better and more modern equipment, might make for a better at-home in-classroom experience for people who are following that way. You know, we do house about 7,700 people in our campuses, so there are the issues of housing and how to make that safer than it would otherwise be. We feed a lot of people. There are questions around that. What would a food service be like under any circumstances? Any one of the circumstances I'm referencing. What are the civil authorities going to allow and or require us to do? I suspect we'll actually require more of ourselves to do than perhaps the civil authorities would require, but we have to await that direction. One of the things that the university system, acting with our presidents, has done was to convene a meeting of the privates and public universities in an effort to reach agreement on advice we would give the administration, the Mills administration, on how we could undergo a reopening exercise successfully. We're still working on that. We have a subcommittee working on that. But the hope is that the privates and the publics can have a common message to deliver to the governor to address some of the issues that we believe need to be addressed. One of the most one of the parts of that document will stress that at 87,000 students, faculty, and staff directly involved in our universities, and by extension to thousands more through the families that perhaps are living on the income or being provided insurance, we are, if not the largest, certainly one of the largest, if I might use this term without intending to offend anyone, the largest industry in the state of Maine. So there are a lot of moving pieces. I don't have all the answers for you. We are still considering whether in classroom could be more safely administered. We're still obviously trying to improve our abilities to respond online. I would like a substantially greater opportunity to call courses up. One final point. We are, one of the other major things we're doing is trying to understand how many classrooms we could use in person if we were to go down that road. What's the capacity if we're going to maintain safe distances or social distancing? So there's a lot of moving parts. Don't mean to use all those moving parts not to have answered the question, all of which is really to say that I don't have a definitive answer yet, but we are working very hard with the presidents and others, and including committees that have been stood up on this campus and others, and the science committee doing a very, really great work and advisement.
Thank you, Chancellor. So there are questions that are coming in all kinds of areas. A set of them fall into questions really that follow up on what the Chancellor just said, that have to do with what will the teaching part of the work be like in the fall? Will we be online? Will we be in the classroom? We've heard the Chancellor's notion of sort of able to call up the class after it's happened. So I'm going to ask both Faye and Dan to speak to this, but I'm also warning Abby that I'd like to, after the two provosts, vice presidents for academic affairs have spoken, for you to offer your perspectives, please, Abby, as a student, and as I understand, someone who's doing some online teaching right now yourself. You know, how do we learn from what's just happened, and how can that inform the fall? But first, you know, Faye and Dan, questions have to do with when will the guidelines be issued? What help will be provided for faculty who want to take what they did this spring and move it to another level, perhaps? How will we think about issues of academic integrity? You know, do we need to be worrying about cheating? Will faculty be required to teach in person if they don't feel comfortable coming into their classrooms? Will they be required to teach online if they would prefer to teach in person? And I guess many of you can guess what these answers are going to be. You know, it's a pretty fluid situation, but let's hear from Faye.
I think that the watchword is to provide accessibility for students, options, choices, to meet them where they are, and to be able to provide a range of ways that they may prefer to learn. I don't know all the answers, but I know we have over 20 planning groups looking at laboratories, for example, and what are protocols in laboratories and how can we reach out remotely with laboratories and be effective. We may have ambassadors of faculty who have taught in combined ways, remotely, online, and in person, to work with their colleagues this summer to talk through other options that faculty may want to consider. We have peer-to-peer then counseling and coaching, as well as some plans in the making of how to make it easier for faculty to do what they want to do as they prepare for fall in offering a portfolio of options for our students. I hope we don't force, anyone to do anything. I believe if we work together that we'll be able to provide the choices that students are looking for, as well as help them if they cannot come back to campus. Can they access face-to-face classes and do the work that needs to be done? If they want to be back on campus, can we foster the face-to-face communication, have some classes that are remote, some online, some in person, and I believe that we will find a place that lets people learn as best they can and foster that together. Dan?
I would add that here at UMM we have several programs that use this model that you meet in the classroom. There's students in the classroom, and at the same time, students are watching a live video, and then that's all being recorded, and other students, a third group of students, are watching it at a different time asynchronously. So we've got 2 or 3 programs that already do that, and we're trying to expand that. We're also looking at flipped classrooms, especially when it comes to math instruction, and we've used a 7-week intensive and 7-week intensive model for a couple, currently for special ed and a couple of other classes or programs, and we're trying to expand that to include the general ed core, so that more students can have that as an option. So the key word that I'm going to throw in there is flexibility. That's what we're trying to shoot for.
And I think I'll add some more keywords too, which are putting students learning first. That's what we're all about. And I know it's very easy to think about all the other factors that impinge on everything that we're doing. But if we can keep focused on providing, as Faye said, accessibility, and as Dan said, flexibly to our students, that's where we need to be, in my opinion. So Abby, tell us a little bit about what your experience was like, what advice you have for all of us as we go forward.
Well, as you know, we were told, and then we had a couple of days, and then it was the weekend. So those first few days for students were a little bit crazy. Everybody wanted to pitch in and figure things out and nail things down. And it kind of bubbled together in this corona event that you all know about, I'm sure. But what that experience, and then what I've been hearing from my peers so far, has taught me about this community is that the student body is resilient. As we heard from Chancellor Malloy earlier with the 90% continuance rate of students, that just sort of proves how much of a community we have here. And I think how much everybody loves what we have going on at UMaine and what we make together. So that said, I think I speak for everybody where I hope we come back in the fall, and I think everybody wants that, but we know that it might not be the safest option. And so with what's been said earlier about the flexibility combination classes, coming now in this added perspective that you alluded to a little bit earlier, President Money, that I'm also teaching online right now. I think that is the best thing that we can offer, is just options for students, understanding that with thousands of students just per class and over all of the different majors that we offer, there's so much diversity to our student body that I think we might have not even realized before coronavirus really happened. I mean, diversity of home experience, diversity of technology, where you come from, socioeconomic elements that we maybe weren't even aware of before. So whatever we can offer, I think, for flexibility for students will be the best. If we can tell them, hey, you can learn at home if you need to, that's great. But if we can come back to our campus, that's even better.
You know, your point about the diversity of the community and and what we sort of have learned about each other through this experience. I'm just going to share a quick anecdote. I was sitting in when I could on some math classes this semester before we went to the remote mode. And so I looked for a way to continue to sit in a little bit as we were in an online setting completely, so that I could see what that was like. And I saw some amazing examples of students trying to figure out how to help each other, which we know is a good tool for learning. It's a good way for people to really consolidate what they know and to help explain it to others. But I was amazed at the generosity and the willingness, not amazed really, but just gratified to see it. So there's a lot we can learn about how we can do the teaching and learning work under any circumstances, really, to be flexible and to make a difference. So Robert, a bunch of questions coming for you now, and I'm sure the Chancellor will have more to say. They have to do with safety and health. And are we going to be ready? Will it be safe? Will we be wearing masks? Will there be distancing in the classrooms? How will we manage dining halls? A lot of questions in the areas where we've been discussing all of the different scenarios. But would you care to say a little bit more to our audience?
Yes, and I want to first of all amplify a little what Abby just said. We've had a lot of correspondence, calls, letters from students, and they're all so thoughtful and desirous to return, but they talk about being flexible and doing it in a way that's as safe as possible. And of course, that's the watchword is, yes, it's very, very important to get back to campus. The educational imperative persists, but we've got to do it safely, and safety will be our first priority, period. We won't deviate from that. And we're looking at, you heard the provost say, we have some 20 groups looking at all sorts of scenarios. So how would somebody operate in a classroom? Would a classroom from a social distancing perspective be cut up into thirds, halves, quarters, fifths? We want to assure that people living on campus can do so safely. So we're looking at protocols for cleaning. We're looking at protocols for living space. Do people live two in a room, one in a room, etc.? Do we look at alternative living environments? I expect, I have every reason to believe that we're still going to be required to do the most basic safety procedures, from washing our hands, and there will be great public information and education campaigns about that, to likely wearing masks and making sure that we're staying as far apart as we can appropriately. So we'll hear about that. People are planning for it. The second we know which way we're going institutionally, with guidance from the federal CDC and the state CDC, these scenarios will be flowed out to the community. But safety is priority one, period. No question about it.
Chancellor, I'm hoping you'll chime in on this. And there are a lot of questions about staff and faculty. What will expectations be if people feel unable to come in? How will that be handled? So,
sure. I don't have definitive answers, but all of that's being worked on. But I do have points to lend to the discussion. You know, in this University of Maine system, we lose about 40% of our students in the first 2 years of their baccalaureate program. We are looking at data on a national basis on numerous surveys that have been done nationally as well as regionally, as well as breaking down to retaining students as opposed to incoming freshman class. The bad news is that it is suggested that if we don't have online options, if we're not able to offer them because we weren't able to get to a safety structure, we're looking at a melt over the summer of somewhere between 16 and 36% on average. And quite frankly, if you combine that with saying, hey, we're not going to be online in the fall, but we'll start, in person in the fall, but we'll start in person in January, I've seen estimates that we could lose 40 to 50% of a freshman class for that semester. Those kinds of compounding of losses of students are going to take an extreme financial problem, which we're currently experiencing, with probably closing the year out around $25 million in the red, to a much larger problem, potentially combined with a lack of assets coming from state government that could threaten closure of major programs that we offer as universities, as well as programs, institutes, and centers. So it's a serious concern, but I absolutely agree with Robert that we have to get to a situation where a safety level is satisfactory and meets the needs that we can reasonably meet. We're going to have this virus in the world for the rest of our lives, in all likelihood, particularly when you look at the viability of these viruses. Having said that, we all look forward to better therapies. Those therapies are actually being developed as we speak. If you look at the pandemic over the last 3 months, survival rates are going up relatively rapidly. There are therapies that have been in test that are showing a great progress made, and particularly the Japanese model of therapy that they've spearheaded. So, somewhere between no cases and what's happening in the world or within our state is going to be certainly our goal is to make the state safer, not less safe. That's why we have to look at other options. Yesterday the world was, at least the academic world, was shaken up a little bit when Notre Dame came forward and said that they're doing in-classroom learning, but they were changing their calendar, and the faculty had agreed to come in earlier, ending the semester at Thanksgiving, or the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, with a program of testing from home after some study period or closure, which would be conducted at home. That model is in some ways being replicated at South Carolina. There are other institutions that are now adding their voice that they're going to open definitively for classroom learning. Boston College, my alma mater, just did it yesterday. Many others are doing it today. So this is a changing set of circumstances that we have to deal with. Safety is extremely important. A couple of questions that have been referenced just in the statements already. Obviously, we're concerned about faculty who are as old as me or older. Obviously, we're concerned about younger faculty who may have particular medical conditions that make them more vulnerable. Same thing for students, same thing for staff. There is not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to what we're doing. Some people have said, well, should we have plexiglass between a faculty member and students in a classroom, if there was classroom? I'm not presupposing. I suspect we could install that in all of our classrooms. Some number of instructors would use it. Some number of instructors would never use it. There are all of these things that we're taking into account and trying to get to the best result. I'll go back to this social distancing. One of the outcomes of being able to use 3 modalities of delivering is that we could rotate, and I think Robert was referencing this, we could rotate who is in the classroom at any given time and still meet the social distancing requirements. If it's a Tuesday and Thursday course and it has 18 students, 9 could be there on Tuesday, the other 9 could be there on Thursday. Maybe there's some switching off that could be allowed to accommodate calendars. The other 9 are either watching it online or they're pulling it up after the class is offered. All of which would go very extensively to lowering the number of people who are in a building or in a classroom or on a campus at any given moment all of which inures to the benefit on a safety side. We also are looking at, well, what does masking do? If I had to guess, and it was up to me, I probably would begin the semester by requiring all people in a classroom to wear masks, with perhaps the exception of the faculty member, as long as some greater distance than the minimum 6 feet is kept. That may be a way to do those things. We know that a bad mask being worn can lower the risk of spread by 50%. So I'm not talking about an N95, but actually just a couple of pieces of cotton made at home and with ear straps. A 50% reduction in combination with social distancing, in combination with fewer people in any classroom at any given time, in combination with affecting food service so that there's not as much contact around that, all of that is going to go very extensively to making all of us substantially safer than we would otherwise be. However, is anyone in a position to guarantee that no one will ever be infected in Maine again? The answer is no. So finding the right balance is going to be important. I've already explained, I think, my fears about what happens to a university system that loses 15 to 40% of its population in a single year. That could be draconian results. Having said that, if that's what we have to go through, that's what we'll have to go through.
I might also quickly add, to build on what the chancellor's noted, is that we're already acquiring safety equipment, yep. Masks, cleaning facilities,
plexiglass,
social distancing templates, and we're looking into acquiring testing for the campus as well. So on many levels, we're anticipating every turn in the road that will allow us to be as safe as possible.
You know, if let me just say this quickly, that if we could begin the semester early, end the semester at Thanksgiving, delay the start of the second semester, those are ideas that might be optimal and are clearly what's going to be followed at some other large universities. Whether that's possible here, I don't know.
So your questions that are coming in, coupled with the responses you're hearing here, are they're just a perfect model of how complex this all is. We've got people who are sending in questions saying, when will we know what we're going to need to do? And as you can hear from this conversation, that's evolving. But the chancellor is going to offer some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I have an answer. You have to do everything. I think you have to. I mean, that's what a crisis is. You have to be prepared to respond in as many ways as humanly possible, as your own physical welfare will allow you, your own psychological welfare will allow you. I sent a message to you all last Friday, I think, where I just urged no one to go off the grid because this is going to evolve in the coming weeks and may evolve quickly. But even, for instance, even if we started in classroom learning, there's no guarantee that we might not have to go to some other modality as a requirement. I just think this is very much in play. And I know, and I want to acknowledge that that's very difficult and troublesome and worrisome for a substantial number of people in the world. And I think that's what we're learning about ourselves. Some of us do better in these circumstances. Some do worse, and some of them just, muddle through. But I think if you found the provision of online learning difficult, I'd be reading everything I could about that and getting better at it. And when I was shaving in the morning, and not everyone shaves, I'd be practicing. If I care about a better in-classroom experience, I'd be working on that. And it's easy for me to say that what other people should do. I'm just saying that we have a calling. We decided to be involved in higher education. We decided that we would trade perhaps other rewards for having a career that allows us to affect generational change. Well, generational change now will require that we are more adaptive than we're comfortable being. It's the new dues we pay for the career that we've chosen.
Thank you, Chancellor. You know, on that point, at one point, it occurred to me that every one of us, including the students, is doing a different job than they think they signed up for now. The work is different. The Chancellor has said it eloquently. We chose this field for lots of different reasons, but I would like to agree and hope that it's the case that we all share this notion of educating future generations as central to why we do this. But the work that it takes to do that is different now, and it will continue to be different. There isn't, I'm avoiding very carefully talking about when we're back to normal. We won't be. The Chancellor was saying in an earlier meeting, we are all shaped and changed by what has been happening now and what continues to happen. And so everything is different. And I think there are those of us who really seek this definiteness that we're not going to get. In the face of that, though, what's happening is the ideas coming from people are incredibly good. They're deep, they're complex. I've got one here. I don't think it's really a question, but it's about, it raises issues of equity and flexibility. Equity, by the way, has to be central here. It's about access for all of our learners and meeting them where they are, and not just paying lip service to that, but actually understanding that, as this person writes in, some students will be sick, caring for sick relatives, and some will inevitably be taking classes online and in person, and maybe it's complicated to be doing both at the same time. And if you're a faculty member, I know that it's complicated to be teaching both at the same time. So everybody's affected and changed by this. But this person has some interesting suggestions. We'll put them to the right committee. We'll make sure they get there. You know, a lot of very concrete ideas about which types of classes would lead to very unbalanced learning experiences if offered in one way or another. So Faye, we need to find out who this is and follow up from the academic affairs side if we can. There was a question, and I think, Chancellor, you got it, but I'll just come back to it. It asked for what's the connection between the governor's reopening plan and the University of Maine system and humane policies for safe return. And then a related question, which I also think you mentioned, but maybe one more round on it, coordination with other institutions of higher ed in the state.
So let me begin, because that's part of the answer. We've convened all of the privates and publics to produce a document that would give a series of recommendations for how what the governor's and the state's approach should be to higher education. So we're working on that, and I would prefer, and I think the governor would prefer, to get a message that is, if not unanimously supported, is by and large supported by the privates and the publics acting together. So we are trying to have an influence with the governor on this very matter. What does a safe return look like? If safe return's not possible, how do we treat other things? For instance, and I referenced this in an earlier comment. You know, we've largely discouraged faculty from coming to the campus. I want to have better facilities for faculty to use in the provision of distance education. If that's the way we have to go, we need a new set of rules that will reflect that we're no longer in the emergency situation, the dire situation we were once in, and we need to be able to invite faculty members. We also have to look at the research mission. We took a one-size-fits-all, basically, with respect to research. Most people were closed down. Again, that was an emergency situation. We now know that there are steps within the research that needs to be conducted and fulfilled that will largely reflect substantially safer rules than may have been supplied previously, and are less than, okay, everybody go home and we wait till the virus is conquered, no matter how long that takes. So it is a complex set of issues. Let me say this: I think we're going to be better for this. I mean, you know, we will mourn the passing of 120 or 130,000 Americans when this thing is done. We will have seen this unbelievable change in our circumstances and disappointments brought into many a family, many a student, many a faculty member. But I think we're going to be better in some respects for it. We're going to understand that connection that we can in fact make in person more easily, and how do we magnify that on a different modality of providing education? How do we make ourselves generally more safe than not just this COVID situation where it's such a dire result, but quite frankly, in other circumstances with respect to other maladies. I think our technology is going to be better. I think our preparation for emergency will be better. I set aside a part of every day and try to make a note of the things that I think we are learning about ourselves and about others that we can apply to make ourselves better educators, better staff people, better students in the long run. But I will also say this, that I'm a little corny, so I apologize, but the most popular song at the end of the First World War was to the tune of "How are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris?" We now have a number of faculty members who opposed in earnest any type of distance learning, who've tried it and like it. We now have a number of students who didn't sign up for anything but in-classroom learning and have found that they liked it in some subjects and not liked it in others. What we're going to end up with is people who want options, more options than anyone in a university system has thought about providing in the past. And we're going to have to deal with that as well. And if we deal with it well, we will be better for it. Change is upon us. We are never going back to where we were. How do we maximize the hard-learned lessons?
Thank you, Dan. You know, as we think about what we're learning and how we're better, I want to turn to research just for a moment, as the Chancellor brought it up. So as the Land, Sea, and Space Grant University in the state, University of Maine has a major research mission that is vital to our being as a university. It is central to the education of our students who are in classrooms taught by active researchers, learning how to be innovators, how to create new knowledge, how to be the leaders in their fields going forward. A part of our research mission too, though, is meant to be about helping this state. That's what a land grant is. That's our tradition. And it's meant to be in response to the questions and challenges that the state has. And we are phenomenal in that work here at UMaine, but we have been super phenomenal in that work in the past several weeks, because our researchers have been able to pivot, have been able to redeploy their scientists, engineers, entire labs to help address immediate challenges that are here in the state of Maine. And that's a part of how we can be better going forward based on what we've learned here. Now we know how to do that on top of the research that is always underway here. And we're able to do it because we've got that capacity. So I want a special thanks to all the researchers and technicians and graduate students who've been working so diligently on everything from creating hospital-grade hand sanitizer to the chemicals that are used in N95 mask fit tests, to consulting with other manufacturing organizations in the state, and to addressing a whole range of health issues. Related to that is that we were able to put together a scientific advisory board for the system that is a small set of our very best scientists working with broader engagement, and they are experts in virology, immunology, epidemiology, engineering, to follow the literature, to be in touch with their colleagues. And so some areas about which you are asking many questions are areas that group is studying carefully and giving us good advice. Everything from, so here's a question: would it be possible to install HEPA filters in classrooms in time for the fall semester? So HVAC considerations, ventilation, airflow, all of those issues. We have an engineer who is right at the cutting edge in being able to give us best advice, best guidance about how to address those. And that's going straight into our planning committees work. Many questions about testing and about what happens if we do have will there be a policy when a presumptive positive person is identified on campus? Well, of course, we hope that that doesn't happen, but the discussions of testing and then what needs to follow once you do testing, hopefully in widespread ways, lots of complexity in that and lots of rapid change. What we're talking about today might look quite different in August or September. So we've got these groups that are staying right on top of it. But relative to testing, you then immediately find yourself thinking about contact tracing and then isolation needs and quarantine needs. And again, that's a part of all of this discussion. Where would that space come from? How would we manage it and organize it? And the science folks are right in the middle of it. So there's a very data-driven, analytic approach to all of this that I think should be reassuring to people that we are working in those ways. There's a question about what happens if there's some predictions that someone cites about a potential outbreak in Penobscot County, but not one in Washington County. So it's a question to the chancellor. How much of the reopening planning, Chancellor, will vary by region of the state and the situation that affects the particular campuses wherever they are?
Yeah, I think that's one of those areas that's likely to be impacted by civil authorities, quite frankly. So we live in a state right now where 12 counties are open and 4 counties are not, are in phases of opening, and others are not, in part based on local statistical analysis and ebbs and flows of hospitalizations and serious illness. Having said all of that, the number of cases in Maine is remarkably small, as it is in Vermont, although they have a higher rate, and New Hampshire, they have a higher rate. But northern New England is very different than Massachusetts, Connecticut, and bordering New York. So we are in different positions within the state because we have something called counties that are these lines that allow us to divide ourselves. But I would point out how different we are than seriously impacted locales, and in New England specifically, and New England and bordering New England, specifically Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York State. So I don't think there's going to be a one size fits all. You know, to touch on something that Joan was just saying, in that science advisory committee that I sat in, I think this is my 3rd meeting that I've sat in and been briefed on. We're talking about universities that have never required attendance taking, but are going to require attendance taking, so that tracing might be easier for a particular day. Or, quite frankly, using technology to take a picture of where everyone's sitting in a classroom, so that we might be able to determine who's close to someone who was close to someone on a particular day that became impacted. You know, I think another area that we've talked about is ultraviolet treatment of facilities. We all know that there was some talk about inserting light into the human body, but that gave rise to the reaction to ultraviolet rays, gave rise to the airline industry trying to buy up every ultraviolet treatment processes that could be had. So there's also market conditions that are going to impact our response as well. This is complicated. It's good we all got a college education.
And more people will get them. There is a question about faculty here. We do not have a faculty person on this panel today. We have had faculty on other panels and are very much engaged in conversations here at UMaine with faculty leadership, both the Senate leadership and AFM leadership. But the question is really sort of about what do the faculty think? And we did some surveying to get a read, again, mid-course in the throes of the semester. But I'll turn to Dan and to Faye, who are in academic affairs, who engage with faculty every day, all day, to tell us what we're hearing from faculty. What do you think are the prevalent themes in their observations?
I think similar to students, faculty are also looking for options and flexibility. Some really want to be back in the classroom this fall and with their students, whatever that takes. Others are concerned and are more leaning toward remote or online delivery. Still others are forming these peer groups that are wonderful things coming in our culture of having conversations, just as we are planning at the system level or the university level, faculty are planning with each other. How might we approach this differently than what we've done before? How might we enhance the quality of the delivery of what we're doing? So they're exploring options in a time that's very different from what it was before and looking forward. But the same uncertainty that students feel, I believe, is also in the ranks of the faculty. I've just been very impressed with their drive to reach out to each other and to experts to ask the questions and begin to look down the road of the options we can provide to students and the options we can provide to faculty and staff to work through this pandemic over the long haul. Dan?
Yep, we did a survey maybe a few weeks after the students left about what are you guys thinking about the fall? And so all the options that I talked about earlier, those came from that survey. Those ideas came from the survey from faculty. And aside from that, I will say that most of our faculty here are really concerned with the students having access to the internet as they're not here, and access to computers and access to quiet study space. Those are the things that we're trying to sort out. How do we facilitate that at a distance this semester? If we did it this semester, how are we gonna do that in the fall if we have a lot of time to plan ahead? So those are the two big ones.
There are a few additional things coming in from faculty into our questions, and many of these are very specific personal situations that I urge people to explore with their department chairs and their deans, about people's own health, people's own circumstances, and what the fall will look like. Flexibility, we've probably said it a dozen times already, that applies in all cases. And safety for everybody, good health for everybody is foremost. So faculty and staff with very specific circumstances need to take those to their leadership and explore the options. I think again, meeting students where they are means enabling faculty to do their work well, and we'll look for ways to do that. So there are questions here for you, Robert. How are we thinking about the off-campus lives of students and how that affects the safety of students on campus? We have also had similar questions about out-of-state students, international students. Again, issues that I know the teams are thinking about, but what could you add here?
We're very interested, of course. We have thousands upon thousands of students off campus. So we've been working quite extensively with students living in Greek housing. We've been working with the town of Orono and Old Town, with some of the very large housing units off campus. And there you're going to be confronted with having to do public information and education as well. We'll certainly include those students, and they are currently included in everything that goes to every student at UMaine in terms of informing, educating, persuading, encouraging. So they'll be attended to like every other student. We won't have them in direct control, if you want to call it that, in the residence halls, but we'll have them participating in every bit of our educational process.
Thank you. There's a question about what did we learn about faculty concerns through the survey that we did in Orono. So I was trying to look that up. Faye may have something to add there too. I think what Faye said before is still the case, that the concerns look a lot like students' concerns, with concerns about having to move so quickly to online. I think was difficult for many people. We've heard that. People wanting to be sure there's adequate technical support, and we've heard the Chancellor talk about new investment there. I'll keep looking while Faye maybe chimes in here if there's more to add.
The worries over how is it going to work if we're teaching face-to-face How's it going to work if I'm going online or remote and I don't know how to do that? Where will I derive my help is what I'm remembering most from the surveys that were taken soon after. The faculty at the University of Maine and the University of Maine Machias, in my opinion, are really, and throughout the system, but I know the ones at the University of Maine and the University of Maine at Machias to some extent, very dedicated people. And so in the emergency switch, it's an uncomfortable thing to not know for sure that you have reached your students. But the perseverance of our students, on par with last term, I mean, 98% persevered to the end. I believe that our faculty worried more than they should have about the job they were doing in reaching students in that time frame. But their concerns about safety of their families and of the students and of themselves we're all experiencing and working through and finding resolution for. But that's what I remember of the survey that was taken right after the.
Right, and I found the results now, and I want to compliment the Faculty Senate for taking the leadership to put this together. So a number of important findings. First of all, the faculty preference is for something as close to a normal semester as possible, with a lot of focus on trying to start face-to-face, but then needing to be ready to move online if needed. A lot of willingness to move fully online if needed, but a substantial number not feeling ready for that at this stage. And this was a few weeks ago. Faculty who are teaching courses with clinical lab performance, practice, studio elements, other special delivery modes have raised very specific concerns about how to do that kind of instruction, how to focus on student learning in those kinds of traditional courses requiring a lot of face-to-face and interactive activity. We actually have a subcommittee working on that question, on what does that look like remotely and what does quality look like. And the question I would always ask is, put first, what are the learning goals that we have for those kinds of courses? And then what do we draw from the ways we already do them and other ways that there might be available? So faculty asking and being curious about things, but as the provost mentions, concerns for their safety, well-being, and career pathways. And there was a question about this too. It went sort of like this. I don't pull it back up here. If a faculty member is simply unable to teach or unwilling to teach, or who knows what reasons, face-to-face, and does teach online, and maybe that's not as successful, what's the implication for tenure and for promotion? So I think this goes back to something that the chancellor said. Things are different. It's not the way it was. And so looking at promotion and tenure, it will seem to me, faculty and peer groups will continue to work. It's their purview to look at those requirements and expectations, of course, but I can't imagine that there won't be some allowance and even expectation of how people choose to describe how they responded and what they did and how it went during this time, because it is unprecedented. Someone cautioned me very early on to stop saying unprecedented, but it really is. Robert, did you have your hand up?
I just wanted to say, apropos what the provost was saying, and this sort of confers to the faculty as well. Over this period of time, we've had thousands upon thousands of interactions with students. They've written us, they've called us, they've texted, they've Zoomed with us. And the great thing is they're asking questions. So they're not rolling up like, into a ball. They're saying, well, how can I make this successful? And how can I achieve the best possible outcome? And we ended up having quite a lot of interactions in the same way with faculty. Much of it was around the technology question. But I think the notion here is that communicating our distress and communicating what we need and communicating our confusion or isolation or a sense of, what's next is absolutely 100% encourage, and it will make us so much stronger. And to the chancellor's point, it will make us better. That is, we will be coming, and I don't see people stepping back. I see them stepping forward. So I would just advocate that if there's a question wherever it resides, please ask somebody. You can always ask us in Student Life. We'll get you to the right place. But communicate, collaborate. Those are the real watchwords here.
And if there's an idea too, not just questions, there are ideas flowing through these questions coming in today. Keep those coming. Make sure they get to people who can help you. I also want to just, for those who don't know, you know that in the Maine legislature, when there's an interest in congratulating someone or some group or offering some kind of support, they have a tradition of offering a sentiment, is what they term the action, where there's a written document and it's officially proclaimed. So the administration of the University of Maine, UMaine Machias, proposed a sentiment, not to the Maine legislature, though that might not have been a bad idea either, but to our own faculty senate. And so that's available. The faculty have been remarkable, just remarkable. And we're hearing it in these student letters, you know, and these are not trumpeted. These stories are individual and personal, but my faculty member called me because she hadn't heard from me, and then she helped me by putting me in touch with a mental health counselor. I mean, it's that level of caring, and it just goes on. We've got a couple more questions that are about fiscal situations. Chancellor, did you have your hand up before? I'm sorry, did I miss you? Mute. You're on mute. I can't hear you.
Just wanted to add to the county comments that I made earlier. Even within the counties, there is great differences. And what we're seeing in certain counties where more nursing homes are located, that being a particular problem, more congregate housing, particularly for the poor, being one of those locations as well. So, I think we use counties in Maine because we have the lines on a map. We probably should use a finer tool to make some of those measurements by. On the fiscal side, Joan, you mind if I just jump into that? I don't think we should be controlled by it, but we're going to be in tough shape. I had a meeting earlier today with representatives of all the unions or associations representing our employees. And as hard as we have tried to hold people harmless from difficult situations and will continue to do through the current fiscal year, I can by no means assure you that that will be continued into the next fiscal year. It may be impossible to do. Again, I gave you some of the statistics about what would happen under certain scenarios. The kinds of loss of revenue that we could potentially experience may change us and be detrimentary to our institution. So I am worried about that, and worried about the results. And as I referenced in my opening remarks, once someone makes a choice not to join us or to leave us, it's hard to fill that seat. And that's what's borne out by our pre-COVID experience of losing about 40% of our students in the first 2 years that they join us. Not numbers that are terribly out of line with other places, particularly given our first-time college students. First generation college students, but anything we can do to retain and anything we can do to attract will inure to our benefit. The other thing, I gave a national talk today on the implications financially for public universities. And I've explained this to some of the folks probably on the call previously. Legislatures have less to cut than ever before in the budget. And that is due largely because of the commitments made by a large number of our states with respect to the expansion of healthcare coverage in Obamacare or other alternatives that states have entered into with respect to Obamacare that allowed them to receive additional dollars to support hospitals. So you know, people might say, well, I lived through this. Well, you know, I know what happened between 2008 and 2011 or 12. The legislatures across the country had far more leeway in that situation than they will have in addressing this economic situation. And if you look at the state's a normal cash of about $700 million, largely driven by sales tax and hospitality taxes, I think we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of lost revenue, which makes our target, our funding of about $225 million a very attractive target, which is one of the reasons that we have striven to tell the story of how important we are to the community of Maine as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you for that. There are a few very specific questions that I want to be sure to address, and they have to do with CARES Act funding. So this is the federal relief, first relief package that came through. The University of Maine did receive $7.6 million. The stipulation for those funds is that they be split so that at least half of those funds go directly to students, and those mechanisms were put in place with great coordination across the system, actually. So those dollars are out there and available. And Connie Smith, who is the director of University of Maine Financial Aid, is the person to contact if you need more information about that. There are multiple web places to find out more about that too. And as the chancellor has said, this is a very difficult fiscal moment, including fiscal year 20. This isn't just about what happens in the future, but this year, because funds were given very promptly to all who were living and rooming and boarding on campus, receiving room and board here, as well as other lost revenue over these past few months. This is a very difficult time, and so those funds will go toward helping to restore some of that. But the planning for the future does also include the kinds of potential scenarios that the chancellor mentions. However, I want to say on a very positive note, on behalf of UMaine and UMaine Machias, these are remarkable institutions with incredible opportunities for learning in the research setting, high quality, our graduates and alums going off to first-rate positions all around the world with connections and networks and groups of people who can help them. So we all, I think on this call, can certainly agree that right now we believe higher education, graduate school, excellent options, and the University of Maine at Machias, great places to do that. I'm going to give everybody a chance for a last word, and the chancellor will have the last word.
No, Joan, can I have the first last word? Because I have people waiting. I have people waiting out there. I want to thank you for the opportunity, for inviting me to participate. I know I'm long-winded. I apologize to all of you for that, but I try to give as complete an answer as I can, and quite frankly, try to share thoughts as a way of developing additional thoughts on the feedback. So I'm going to scoot if I have permission. I'm going to scoot and get into my next meeting, but I very much appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Chancellor. Terrific. Okay, then we'll let Faye have the last word now. Let's start with Abby.
Well, I guess I just wanted to say thank you everybody for joining us for this panel. And just as a sort of quick message for you all, just to the students or staff or faculty maybe who are starting to feel the weight of not being on our campus a little bit more day to day, just know that it's not gone, and the campus that we had to leave is still there. And even though it might not look the same when we return, we will return, and it'll be with the same love that we had when we left. So just stay positive and understand that we're all still here for you. To any students who are on the call in particular, just wanted to put a little plug in that you can always come to me with your questions and your concerns, and I will delegate that to the appropriate place as best as I can. But just know that you don't need to hold on to it. You can always reach out and someone will be there to answer your question as best as we can. So thanks again, and hopefully see you all soon.
Thanks, Abby. There is a Q&A in the UMaine website. You can, we're updating that. Questions we didn't get to today, we will get answers up there as quickly as we can. Dan.
I would say stay tuned. We'll keep doing weekly or bi-weekly updates as soon as we as soon as we know something, we'll let everybody know something. And the people that are doing the planning, the faculty and the staff, we're on it, and it's going to be a very busy summer.
Thank you, Dan. Robert.
Thank you. It's been a good experience. I would say that, as many of you listening might know, I'm entering my 36th year at the University of Maine, and I'm an unabashed believer in the university as one of the most amazing gems in the state and the nation. But I've never, and I've always been so proud of it, but I've never been more proud of it. When we tipped everything over in early March, there was some trepidation, but people just embraced the challenge. They turned it into an opportunity, and I've just been amazed by the resilience of our students, the joy they've brought to the process, if you will, and by the amazing brilliance of our faculty and staff. They've just been unbelievable. So for me, another great moment of pride, and for all of you who've been here for a long time too. Some people say, well, longevity, you've seen it all. We haven't. This has been an experience.
Thank you, Robert. And Faye, to close us out.
For over 150 years, the University of Maine has had faculty and staff to meet students where they are and take them on the path of where they want to go. It's an uncertain time, and that can be uncomfortable, but I encourage you to have confidence in this community of people. It is an extraordinary time, but when you have that feeling of support and caring and connection around you, anything is possible. We'll get you where you need to go. Be happy to have you join us this fall and to continue this learning process. Thank you for being a part of today.
With that, we'll close. Thank you all. Take care and keep your eye on the websites. We'll keep you posted. Best wishes to all. Thank you.
Bye-bye.